So when Yamaha were looking at these modules and when they were looking at designing them, they realized that a lot of drummers are using plugins, VSTIs, and they knew that they had to compete in some way with that, because anyone can buy an electronic kit and just connect it up to a computer and run a plugin, a VSTI. That's very simple. But a lot of people don't want to take a computer on stage. So to get around this, Yamaha would have to put all the control that you have on a VSTI into these two drum modules. When we record in the studio, we have our drums, we have our microphones, and then we can change the sound in lots of different ways, and that gives us our final recording. Most drum modules have the effects burnt into the sample. You can't take the gated reverb off the gated rock sound because it's already burnt into the sample. It's part of that sample. And maybe you can change the EQ afterwards, or maybe add a little bit more reverb or stuff like that, but you don't have a lot of control. So what Yamaha wanted to do was, with the Pro and the Pro-X, they wanted to make it as close to the same signal path as a studio recording as they could. So you have your drum sounds, they're captured by microphones, but you can't change the microphone sound after you've recorded it. Then you can change the sound in lots of different ways, EQ, transient control, ambience, etc. And that gives you your finished drum sound. And that just happens to be exactly how VSTIs work as well. You have your drum sound already recorded through the microphones as a raw file, and then you can treat them in lots of different ways, EQ, ambience, reverb, other effects, to give you your finished drum sound. So because of that, these modules behave more like a drum kit, an acoustic drum kit in the studio, than most other electronic kits. To give you an idea how these work, how you can have your raw drum sound and then treat it in a particular way to come up with something, I've put this together. And this is using a preset sound, but I've just done a slight version of it. So this kit here uses internal drum sounds, but it really doesn't sound anything particularly exciting at the moment. It's just the raw drum sounds, no effects, no nothing. It's a 10-inch snare and it's some high-tuned jazzy toms. But if I shorten the sounds and I tune them up, they turn into this. And then if I turn the ambience modifier up, I can add some natural room ambience and some digital reverb onto the sound of the kit. Now, when the sounds for the Pro and the Pro-X modules were recorded, they were recorded in lots of different studios across Europe. Not only the drum sound through the microphones was recorded, but the ambient sound of the room was also recorded. So when you turn up the ambience modifier, what you're actually doing is bringing in two more audio channels, which are the ambience channels from those original recordings. So if I take my not very interesting drum sound, turn up the ambience modifier, they now sound like this. But it's not just a matter of how they sound now, it's also a matter of how they behave when I'm actually playing them. So because these are using real effects, they're not just the sounds burnt into the sample. If I play quietly on the pads, they actually come in below the threshold at which the effects will start to work properly. If I play these pads quietly, you can still hear the original sample, and then as I play louder, the effects will start to come in. But as well as having the internal sounds on both modules, you can also import up to 1,000 samples of your own. Now, these can be anything. These can be a one-shot, these can be a loop, these can be, you name it, you can load them. But what you can also do on the Pro and the Pro-X is you can load multi-layer samples. So if you have access, or if you have some software of your own and you like a particular snare drum, you can extract the snare drum, you can export all the different layers, you can chop up the samples, you can put them onto a USB drive. You need to name them in a particular way, and I'll be doing a video about exactly how you do this. And then you can just import them into the module, tell the module that it's a multi-layer sample, and it will sort out the positions of all the samples, the layers, and all that sort of thing. So what you can do, you can have up to 120 samples per pad. That's 40 on the head, 40 on both rims, rim shot and cross stick. And how this works is it's 10 layers deep, and it's 4 repeating samples, or round robin samples. So the first hit will give you the first sample, second hit will give you the second sample, third hit, and so on. So you never get exactly the same sound twice. This is something you might have heard me say before, but it's the whole concept of the car alarm. When you hear a car alarm go off, after a while you don't hear it, or a house alarm, some sort of alarm. After 2 or 3 minutes, you just sort of don't hear it as much. When it first starts, it's really obvious, but your brain zones it out because it's not important and it's not changing. With multi-layer samples, if every single sample is the same, you just don't hear it after a while. It just becomes background noise. But with this, with 10 layers and 4 repeating samples, you always get a very, very slightly different sample. So your brain doesn't zone out to the sound, and it sounds much more natural, and it sounds much more real. So to give you an idea of the sort of thing you can do, these are some multi-layer samples which I've imported, and you can hear how good they sound. But as I mentioned earlier, you can also use all the internal effects on multi-layer samples, or any samples which you bring in. So for instance, on that last sound, which is a 14x8 snare drum, which I've imported from some software, I can turn up the ambience modifier, and when I get past 50%, I can actually add digital reverb onto the sound of that snare drum as well, like this. Maybe put a little bit of compression on, a little bit of effects. So you can treat any sound, whether it's internal or one which you've brought in, with the same effects. Very handy.